Well, hi everybody, it's Rusty here again, and you may recall from one of my previous videos, I argued that age isn't something that should keep you from hiking. But can age actually work to your advantage on the trail? Well, let's talk about that. So when I started thinking about this topic and what I wanted to say about it, I realized that by the time you're 64, everybody's life experience is really different. And no matter what I said, between my five viewers, four out of the five things just wouldn't apply to them. So I can only speak from personal experience. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to compare the person I know best, me, at age 21 versus me at age 64. So we got to start by at least acknowledging that, despite the fact that I was rah-rah positive in my last video and that I have a lot of friends and you can go out to the internet and find a lot of people are doing great things as they get a little bit older. The fact is there are disadvantages that you have if you're comparing yourself between the 64-year-old and the 21-year-old. Your physical condition is just not going to be as good. For example, I just can't compete the way I could when I was 21 years old, and I'm also susceptible to injury and harsh conditions. Under injuries, I have dislocated a shoulder while out on the trail. I've fallen several times on ice, not while hiking, but while putting bird feeders out in the backyard, and injured a rotator cuff a couple times. And I could probably not survive extreme conditions like the things that will cause hypo or hyperthermia, in other words, freezing or overheating. And of course, there's the chronic and the accumulated health challenges that we have. I got this phrase from a friend of mine, Tyrone, who never says problems. Everything's a challenge. For example, if you have a bad knee, that's a challenge, not a problem. So yes, I have challenges with, like I said, with my rotator cuff. I actually herniated a disc while out hiking once. So these are challenges that I have to deal with. And then, of course, compared to being 21, there's responsibilities. There's, meeting the mortgage. There's, having a wife, having children. So these are disadvantages in the sense of how they can impact your ability to go out and hike. But there are advantages. There's what I called old guy advantage number one, at least in my case. There's the financial advantage. When I was 21, I hit the trail, I think, with $180 in my pocket, mostly in American Express Travelers checks. They were a thing back then. I don't know what that translates in today's money, maybe around $600 in today's money. That actually wouldn't get me very far. But now it's less of a problem. I mean, I'm not saying I'm rich, but if I want to buy a piece of lightweight equipment, I certainly can. And lightweight is the key there because this is something that where your age is actually an advantage, at least your financial condition, because lighter weight equipment, the more enjoyable your hike's going to be. For example, here is my tent. When I was 21, it weighed 7.5 pounds. Not only couldn't I afford anything more, but in reality, there probably wasn't anything better available back in those days, but that's besides the point. And now here's my new tent, and it's, it's 1.5 pounds. It makes a big difference in enjoying the trail. Hostels, transportation, and resupply just aren't a problem. I was really stretching my budget when I was hiking when I was 21. I did a 115-mile hike from the Mass Pike up to Peru, Vermont. And I had to pinch every penny along the way. And when I ran out of money, I just basically ran out of trail. Another advantage. Well, when you're 64, you have better life experience. Now, Darlene probably would laugh and disagree with this one, but I say, I have more mental maturity. I feel less inclined to push beyond my limits. Through hiking wasn't a thing very much back in the 70s, but if I had been trying to through hike, I really think I would have been pushing to do the miles rather than to actually enjoy the hike. Now, I was trying to enjoy that hike, and I actually wasn't pushing to do the miles. But if it had been a through hike, I would have had to be doing that. Now, there is a hiker known as Dr. Fixit, and he wrote a book. I think it was Katahdin was in the name. I forget the exact name of the book. But there was an interesting quote in it, and I was at a hostel, so I don't own the book, but I saw it at a hostel, and I flipped through it. He said, everybody tells me how far they've gone, but nobody tells me what they saw. Something like that. And, and I find that's actually true. I mean, like when I tell people, how long my 566.4 mile hike was, and by the way, it was 566.4 miles, there's a little bit of bragging in there, but it's also just to give somebody's mind something to latch onto. If they've never had the hiking experience, at least they know what 566 miles is. But I didn't fall into that as much. I wasn't trying to set new personal records every day. The only days that I hiked particularly long, it was out of necessity. So, you have that mental maturity not to push beyond your limits. And related to that, of course, is decision-making ability. You probably, as you get older, you're able to assess risk more. You'll probably be able to evaluate, what weather conditions you might be going into. For example, you see here there was a sign on a tree telling me I better get water because the water supply at a particular camp wasn't very, reliable. Well, it wasn't a matter of sitting there scratching my head and saying, well, can I go a little farther without the water and maybe I can get some? No, I just took the water there. It turned out I didn't need it, but, because the unreliable water, unreliable, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Well, it happened to be there. These gentlemen in this other picture on the right, that's the professor and doc, younger hikers, and they were encouraging. They were trying to be positive. They weren't being mean or anything. They're trying to be positive. They were telling me how well I was doing, and I was putting in more miles than they expected to see somebody my age doing. But I had stopped a stealth camp, and they're like, oh man, why are you stopping? Just go up, you can get up the next hill. And they were trying to be friendly and encouraging. But I knew that there was no way I was going to go any further that day. And it's a good thing because the next morning I really felt great after having stopped early, and I was able to get up that next mountain with no problem. And I am 100% certain that if I had tried it the night before, it would have been a disaster. I would have been out after dark. I've mentioned this before. I do have a 2-hour rule. 2 hours before sunset, unless I know there's actually a shelter within a mile or so that I can get to, I start looking for a good place to camp if it's that late in the day and there are no better prospects. And that's my rule, and that gives me plenty of time to set up usually. Sometimes you don't find anything and you end up still hiking for quite a while, but at least you've been looking for something along the way. Also, the enjoyment of the hike, not really a category here on this chart, but the enjoyment of the hike I think was increased. I made a lot of friends. There's a couple out there, a couple of friends that I still keep in regular contact with. In one case, I met the guy once at a campground. In another case, I'd hiked with him for several days, and we keep in contact and continue to encourage each other. Also, I have more hiking experience. There's no way I could have less hiking experience, 40 years. Even if I did nothing, I'd at least have the same amount of hiking experience. So I've been doing quite a bit of hiking, and I've been taking advantage of that experience. This is another one, though. The advantage number 3 is your schedule flexibility. When you're 21, you're kind of getting from, I'll call it the open parentheses. Responsibility is just starting. Commitments, I should say, commitments are just starting. Life commitments. You've got to get a job. You've got to get your career going. If you're interested in getting married, you want to start dealing with those responsibilities. I have to admit, I lived the standard American dream. I bought a house. I got married. Well, I got married first, and then we eventually bought a house together. Whereas when you're 64, you have to kind of close that parentheses, I guess is a way to put it. And now what's ahead of you is the uncommitted time. So that this was the first time when I was out on the trail with Mike. We were up in Maine, and we just had equipment failures. Some tarps ripped, packs got chewed through because of not properly securing it from the local rodents, and we just bagged that particular trip. And this is the first time I heard a saying from the lady at the hostel: the trail will be there next year. When you're 21, trying to do maybe a through hike where you're about to take on all these life commitments, yeah, the trail is there next year, but you won't be able to get to it next year. So as you're older, you have that flexibility, and this gets back to that idea of not pushing too far. Yeah, okay, we didn't make that trip, but the trail is there, and Mike made it in the future, and I actually should be doing that section of trail this year. Which leads to the ability to do alternative hikes to the standard through hike, if that's what your thing is. Like if you're 21 and you want to have that experience of completing the Appalachian Trail, you've got two choices: north to south, or north to south or south to north. And the schedules for that is pretty well set in order to beat the weather and everything. Whereas if you know that you can spread it over a few years, you can do a couple things. You can hike in the off season, and by off season, I just mean off through hiking season. In other words, being on the parts of the trail where the through hikers aren't there yet or have already passed by. You can do flip-flops, and again, this gets back to the financial condition where you can afford to travel around to get to different vastly separated parts of the trail to do a flip-flop. And then, of course, there's the lashes, which is how I've been doing it. Lash stands for long section hike, where you just say, yeah, I'm not going to do the whole trail this year, but maybe I'll do it over the space of 3 years. Well, I did like the first third of the trail over the space of many, many years while I was working and had a career and everything. And then last year I did about a third of the trail, and then this year I plan on doing about a third of the trail. So these things are much more possible for you when you're 64. So here's the comparison. Me 21 versus me 64. Well, at 21, my physical condition was I was training for competition. And that's actually very hard on the body. Training for competition and training for health, or exercise for health, which is what I'm doing now at 64, are two very different things. One of them really tears your body down quite a bit. You get into tip-top condition, athletic condition, like I was when I was hiking at 21. I had just come off 7 years of intense training for track. I was a middle distance runner, which is a very difficult distance, as you have to have, you have to train both for speed and endurance, and doing that at 64 would probably not be in my best interest. So now I have the attitude of exercising for health. When I was 21 and I went on my extended trip, I made it 16 nights on the trail. Now at 64, last year I had 50 nights on the trail. Back then I was able to do 115 miles. Last year, I was 63, but whatever. I was able to do 730 miles. When I was 21, when I got off the trail, I couldn't walk normally for a month. My ankles were torn apart. It was just a really bad time. I had been carrying a super heavy pack, and despite the fact that I was in this tip-top athletic condition, I just the wear and tear on the body just made it very difficult. Whereas the only real problem I had, I did sprain a twist a couple ankles, I should say, while I was out on the trail. That took me a day to recover from. But really, the big thing was, yeah, I got a little motion sickness on the train on the way back. Darlene noted I was a little grumpy, which is what happens to me when I get nauseous from train travel. As far as enjoying the trail, even though when I was 21, I went out with the express purpose of not having a schedule and just doing whatever miles I could before I ran out of money. If this is any kind of indication, I had 7 photos of interesting stuff. My trip last year, I literally have hundreds of photos and dozens of videos from that trip. And I really, spending time taking a photo and not looking what you're taking the photo of, that wasn't what was happening. I was really enjoying that entire trip. I had I would say that I had a much better time on a mile per mile basis, however you want to measure it, much better and more enjoyable time at 64 versus 21. And I think attitude was really most of that. So what's the conclusion to all of this? Well, here's me at 21. Actually, I think I was 22 when that picture's the only one I could find. And I don't know when this transformation happened. It kind of happened overnight, but suddenly I just find myself thinking about how age can be an advantage out on the trail. Thanks for listening.